Welcome, everybody, to another expert talk series with your extended family and those people who are working day and night to get ALS out the door. As you know, research on ALS is continually progressing, and at Everything ALS, we are dedicated to uncovering new discoveries, aiding in early detection, and working towards finding a cure for ALS. You can assist us by participating in our speech study. The purpose of the speech study is to enhance the diagnosis and prognosis of ALS. We are seeking participants to provide 5 speech recordings, each lasting 15 minutes, just once a month, for a total of 75 minutes over 5 months. We welcome healthy participants as well as individuals diagnosed or probable with ALS to join us. To enroll, please visit everythinals.org/speech project and fill out that form. And we have one other ask. We are also having another study. We are actively recruiting for asymptomatic gene carrier study. If you are a gene carrier and asymptomatic and interested in remotely monitoring your speech, cognition, and motor skills, please contact us at everythingals.org/asymptomatic-study and fill out our form. Thank you so much for everybody taking your time to be here with us today. And with that, Christian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, McFinn. And thanks everybody for joining tonight. I'm Christian Rubio, Executive Director at Everything ALS. And we are really excited to be hosting a special event tonight as part of our Expert Talk series. Tonight's presentation is called Revolutionizing ALS Research, ALL ALS You. And this is really an introduction and explanation of one of the most important natural history studies being conducted across the country. And we're really proud and excited to have key representatives from the study, spanning a range of both people running the research, people who are going to be able to explain more of the patient experience, and of course, also why it's so important to advocate for research like this as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce, and a couple of housekeeping notes really quickly. It is an interactive session, so please, as we go along, please ask your questions in the chat. We will save the Q&A for the end of the program, the end of the formal presentation. And then there will be plenty of time for community discussion. Our speakers are here to engage you directly about them, and we look forward to that discussion as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, these sessions are recorded. However, at the very end, after that, there will be community time to discuss anything else that you want to bring up. That part is not recorded and it will not be broadcasted. So by all means, if you have any types of conversation that you want to raise in the closed group session, that'll be after as well. With that, I'd like to welcome our speakers tonight. Joining us for the core presentation will be Dr. James Barry, Andrea Pauls-Bachmann, and Shubhangi Lal. And they will be presenting different elements of the study in the program. And just to give some background and introduction on our speakers, Dr. James Barry is a licensed neurologist who specializes in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, and he holds several key roles. He's the Winthrop Family Scholar in ALS Sciences and director of the Massachusetts General Hospital Multidisciplinary ALS Clinic, and he's chief of the Division of ALS and Motor Neuron Diseases. He's expanded the clinic's reach through initiatives like the ALS House Call and video televisit programs. As a researcher, Dr. Barry designs and manages ALS trials at MGH and other centers nationwide, focusing on identifying ALS biomarkers in blood and spinal fluid, and particularly those related to abnormal inflammation. He collaborates with global researchers and is developing mobile health and digital methods to improve understanding of ALS and to accelerate therapy development. He works closely with us here at Everything ALS on exactly these initiatives and studies, and we're a proud collaborator of his. And additionally, Dr. Barry directs the MGH Neurological Clinical Research Institute and the Mass General Brigham Neurodegenerative Clinical Research Fellowship. He contributes to the Massachusetts ALS Registry, the CDC-ATSDR National ALS Registry, and the Biorepository Expert Panels. and he leads the NEALS Biorepository and Technology ALS subcommittee. He stays busy and he works very closely with the whole community. So we thank you so much, James, for being with us tonight. On to our additional speakers who are equally important to the community. Andrea Paulsbackman is the founder of ALS Strategy Consulting, where she works tirelessly alongside all of us to form and align the interests of people living with ALS alongside advocacy groups and regulators, funders, researchers, and industry in the ALS disease space to find solutions and break down silos. Andrea comes to the ALS community as a former caregiver for her mother, whose passing from ALS prompted her to leave a long-time career in institutional investment management. And she has served as CEO of the Les Turner ALS Foundation, as a board member of the International Alliance of ALS M&D Associations, and as a national trustee of the ALS Association. Currently, she serves on several working groups for AMP ALS and is on the steering committee for the Access for All in ALS Consortium, otherwise known as ALL ALS. Andrea has held a variety of roles in the ALS community and has served as a committee member for NIND's ALS Strategic Plan Priorities and has a consumer reviewer of the congressionally directed medical research program in ALS. And she's the moderator for the CDC National ALS Registry's annual research symposium and meeting. She collaborates with nearly every public and private ALS group in the country, and we are proud to collaborate with her, and we thank her for often being a connector and a mouthpiece to the whole community that we value greatly. It's a pleasure to work with her directly. Andrea holds an MBA in finance from DePaul University and a BBA in public accounting from Loyola University and a certificate in professional studies in nonprofit management from Northwestern. And finally, not to be outdone, our other presenter who's going to be talking on behalf of the Foundation for NIH is Shubhangi Lal. She's the project manager and for neuroscience at the FNIH. And Shubhangi has 10 years of experience in leading end-to-end life science, regulatory and healthcare and technology and commercialization initiatives by advising clients on drug and device development and approval processes, performing market research and creating business proposals, obtaining grants and budgets and defining project goals and milestones, and engaging stakeholders and onboarding project teams and managing project timelines and developing regulatory submission documents and staying updated with the US FDA regulations. She really represents some of the key gates that we have to be able to make sure that this research crosses through and serves us all end to end. So we welcome all of you. And Shubhangi, I believe we're going to start with your presentation.
Yes, thank you so much. Good evening. I'm Shubhangi Lal, the project manager for the Accelerating Medicines Partnership Program in ALS at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, or FNIH. Thank you so much for having me. I'm extremely delighted to be here and speak about this important initiative today. Next slide, please. All right. So I wanted to give a brief introduction about what FNIH is. So FNIH is an independent non-for-profit organization dedicated to advancing biomedical research. It was founded by the US Congress to support the mission of the NIH. FNIH convenes public-private partnerships that connect the world's leading organizations to accelerate medical breakthroughs for patients regardless of what disease they have. Through a collaborative team science approach, it solves complex health challenges that no single organization can solve alone. We have supported over 600 programs since inception and currently have 125 active programs in our portfolio. We've raised over $1.5 billion in funding to date and are a lean organization with 90 cents per dollar spent directly in program management. The FNIH has managed several successful programs from concept and design to implementation and assessment of outcomes. Next slide, please. So one of FNIH's flagship initiatives is the Accelerating Medicines Partnership Program, or the AMP program. The AMP program leverages public and private resources to enhance our understanding of disease pathways and accelerate drug development. This is achieved by identifying new targets, biomarkers, tools, and technologies by bringing about consensus between the public sector, such as NIH institutions, FDA, and private players, such as pharmaceutical, biotech companies, as well as patient organizations. AMP programs operate in a pre-competitive environment and promote data democratization. We have developed AMP programs in various disease areas such as neuro, cardiac, immunity and inflammation space, and various others. AMP projects are typically multi-million dollar initiatives and span usually 5 years. Next slide, please. To date, FNIH has convened and managed 12 AMP programs, raising a total of $917 million in investment in the last 10 years. And in these last 10 years, we've worked very closely with close to 40 industry partners across 16 NIH, ICs, and 45 nonprofits.
Wow.
Next slide, please. So as a component of the Act for ALS law, AMP ALS was set up as a public-private partnership that brings together the NIH, FDA, the Critical Path Institute, and several other private partners that include pharmaceutical companies, patient organizations, patient research organizations, and some biotechs. And at the center of it are the people with lived experience, guided by their input and the ALS advocacy community. AMP ALS has a common goal of establishing a comprehensive strategy to expedite the development of effective new treatments for people living with ALS or at risk for developing ALS. Next slide, please. So AMP ALS aims to tackle ALS from multiple angles. One key focus is to build a centralized database, the ALS knowledge platform, that will be used by academic and industry researchers to access high-value, de-identified, individual-level clinical and molecular data sets collected from people living with ALS or at genetic risk for developing ALS and controls. By analyzing the vast data set compiled through the ALS knowledge platform, researchers will be able to uncover groundbreaking insights into the disease's underlying mechanisms. These discoveries could lead to the identification of novel targets for drug development, potentially paving the way for treatments that can slow or even halt ALS progression. Another critical area AMP ALS is focusing on is biomarkers. AMP ALS is heavily invested in developing reliable biomarkers, not only to enable early diagnosis, but also for measuring progression and treatment response in clinical trials. The ALL ALS Natural History Study that Dr. Berry will be speaking about next is aimed to be the most comprehensive natural history study till date in terms of numbers and diversity. It will not only follow people with ALS, but will also follow people at risk of developing ALS, collecting longitudinal biospecimens and valuable data on disease progression, diagnosis, and response to various factors. The infrastructure for this study is funded by NIH, while AMP ALS and its partners will direct and fund studies and analysis on these collected biospecimens. Finally, development of validated and regulatory grade clinical outcome assessments. The Critical Path Institute, along with FDA, is leading this effort. The goal here is to understand the gaps and opportunities and to get an understanding of where additional new COAs or data is needed. We are also working on optimizing currently used COAs and address any other regulatory requirements. It's important to remember that all of these initiatives are working in synergy. The knowledge platform allows researchers to share data from the natural history study, which can then inform biomarker development, ultimately leading to better diagnosis and treatment options. This collaborative effort is what makes AMP ALS so powerful. It's not just about individual efforts, but about laying a foundation of collaboration. And of course, a key group of collaborators are the people most affected by the disease, the people with lived experience. By directly involving them in discussions about research goals and initiatives in our various technical working groups, we've ensured that the program addresses issues most relevant to their needs and well being. Their feedback ensures that clinical studies are practical and minimizes burden on on the participants. Next slide, please. We've structured AMP-ALS into three distinct stages in its implementation timeline. Currently, we are in stage one, the foundation stage. Our primary focus is building a robust infrastructure such as the ALS Knowledge Platform. Stage Bionetworks has been selected as the portal developer by the steering committee, which is the decision-making body within the program. We anticipate launching this platform by the second quarter of 2025. We are currently actively onboarding data contributors and will also be working on harmonizing omics and clinical data sets. This effort is closely aligned with the Critical Path Institute, which has identified high value ALS clinical data sets for inclusion into the portal. The All ALS Natural History Study successfully recruited its first participant in July last year. You'll be hearing all about the excellent progress the consortium has made in the next presentation. Over the next 12 months, we also plan to conduct pilot biomarker assays. These studies will use existing biospecimens that we can source from different repositories as we wait for biospecimens to be available from the All ALS study. In stage two, we'll start ingressing all ALS data into the ALS knowledge platform. Additionally, we'll expand our biomarker research efforts, leveraging samples from the all ALS participants, including those with genetic risk for ALS. And in the context of these studies, we'll conduct omic assays, etc. We'll actively collaborate and align with ongoing research in the field. In the final third stage of the project, we will be completing the data integration efforts and the biomarker validation. The Critical Path Institute will also provide the regulatory requirements for new and optimized clinical outcome assessments. This overview provides a snapshot of our current progress. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the AMP-ALS program is a collaborative effort which has been made possible by the expertise and funding provided by our public and private sector partners. I would, a special thanks to the AMP-ALS leadership that includes Dan Doktorov, founder of Target ALS, Stephanie Fredette, VP at Biogen, and Amelie Kubitz, program director at NINDS. Their insightful leadership has been valuable. I also want to express my gratitude to all the representatives from our partner organizations who have contributed to the program and to all the PWLEs who have supported us. Together, we hope to achieve significant progress and impact the future of ALS drug development. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Next slide.
I think Kristen is going to bring up the slide deck next. Let's see, are there questions in the meantime for Shubhangi? There are a couple of questions in the chat. So Ben Brooks asked, will natural history in ALS study capture effects of non-invasive ventilation in ALS management, and how to improve the effects of non-invasive ventilation in these patients? Let's put a pin in that. We can come back to that. But the answer is, I hope that we're collecting the data that will help us get there, at least in some ways. There's a question about NU9 and AKV9, and we certainly know Dr. Oslinger, a wonderful colleague, and I'm not aware that is in clinical trials yet.
Actually, she will be speaking to this community in an upcoming talk in I believe 3 or 4 weeks. So
great. Oh, wonderful.
we'll make sure we ask her that question when she's on. All right, I have the next presentation queued up. And we're off.
Thanks so much. So I'm gonna get this started to talk about all ALS. And all ALS is really called Access for All in ALS. The idea here is to really have a natural history study and biomarker study that will help us answer many, many questions all together, drawing from as much of the community and the population of people with lived experience across the country as possible. And I think we want to thank right from the beginning, thank NIH for their really sort of visionary funding for this. And the funding really came to NIH through the Act for ALS. And that really was, the result of incredible work from people with lived experience, some of whom are on the call, many of whom are not on the call. And it never would have been here without all of that really wonderful work. So thank you to Everything ALS for hosting us tonight as well. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about the overall goals of the All ALS Consortium. Note that I'm calling it a consortium here and not a study. It actually is more than a study. In fact, you'll hear that it's already 2 studies with the possibility of adding more studies. I'll talk about the structure of the natural history study, or actually more aptly studies that are going on, and then describe sort of what makes this study different and how it fits in with existing studies in ALS. I think it's a very legitimate question to ask. Well, there are other studies going on. How will this be sort of adjacent to those and work in conjunction with those, because it should. We'll talk about who can participate and the various different cohorts in these studies. And then we're going to hear from patient advocates and 2 participants who've already enrolled. We'll give you information about how you can get involved and learn more about this. And this last bullet point couldn't be stressed more. Thank you for really revolutionizing ALS through research that we're doing today to transform it for tomorrow. Next slide. So this is a sort of a brief summary of the structure of AMP-ALS and all ALS in a simplified way. And it's a bit of it's sort of just drilling down in a different way than Shubhangi's figures, but really goes hand in hand with those. So as you heard, Accelerating Medicines Partnership is kind of an NIH, FNIH, FDA, and private sort of partnership. And there are actually AMP programs in multiple diseases, and they have really been like a shot of adrenaline to these other disease states to bring together the community, to make data available, and to act as sort of a resource for the whole community. So it's incredibly exciting to have an AMP program for ALS to accumulate data and then to facilitate open science. And I will just say at the outset, this is incredibly important in today's world of AI and machine learning, when having big data sets really allows us to get new meaning from the data that already exists, if we can put them in one place and be able to kind of use them all together. So you heard about the broader goals of AMP-ALS to bring together existing data, but we also have this big goal to use the All ALS Consortium to generate new data and new biosamples for the community. And so the goal of All ALS is to generate this, what we call prospective data and sample collection and sharing. Prospective meaning we start now and we go forward. It's not something that exists, we're making it all together. And there are 2 coordinating centers for this, Barrow Neurologic Institute in Arizona and the Healy Center at MGH in Boston. And each of these coordinating centers really oversee the activities at 19 or 16 sites. So these sites are where participants are enrolling, and the coordinating center makes sure that the protocol is on track, that all the ethics board IRB stuff is done, making sure that everybody is qualified to do what they should do, making sure the data is getting to the right place, is clean, is making sense, and sort of overseeing the whole process. But that enrollment is happening at the sites, and I'll show you the sites in just a minute. The product of this will be data that goes into the AMP-ALS knowledge portal, alongside all the existing data that they're ingressing from existing sources now. And then the biosamples will go to the NIH BioSend biorepository, and they'll be available there for request by researchers really around the globe. Next slide. So these are the two coordinating centers. There are many what we call PIs, principal investigators, kind of leaders of this project. We have, I think, 11 of us, plus a few that are not officially principal investigators, but really are acting in that regard. The PI, the sort of what we call the contact PI, the one through whom information flows to and from the NIH. At the West Coordinating Center is Bob Bowser, and at the East Coordinating Center is me. Next slide. So we have a number of goals. We have to kind of bin them together in order to really talk about them in a way that's organized. But one of our really important goals is to use All ALS and the protocols within All ALS, or the studies within All ALS, to accelerate research outcomes. That means collecting large amounts of data to share with researchers around the world. And when I say research outcomes, that means when we do a trial, we have to give a drug or a placebo, or in some cases just the drug, to people who are living with ALS, and then follow something and determine whether that drug is helping them by slowing the disease progression, by improving a symptom, by reversing the symptoms. But we need something to follow, and these are often questionnaires or tests that we do. So things like the ALS Functional Rating Scale Revised, but also quality of life scales, other scales of function, scales about how people are breathing, also direct tests of how people are breathing or what their strength is through what's called handheld dynamometry. We're collecting data on these so that we can understand which ones of these change the most, are most relevant to the most important symptoms in ALS. And we're working with the FDA to really refine what we know about the scales that we already are using and try to discover which new scales might be useful in clinical trials. Another big sort of goal of ours is to really sort of integrate All ALS into the existing world of data so that we can combine the data from past studies and current studies and All ALS in the knowledge portal to really both add to what data we have, but also fill in gaps in data that we don't have from previous studies. We want to create a community through All ALS. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is by starting community webinars. We're going as a partner onto webinars like this one, and that's really exciting. And we're also starting quarterly webinars as well. And so we'll be sending out information about that. And you can also find it at the website. The website itself is really designed to help people understand what's going on in the study, including sort of a counter saying, how many people have enrolled and how many biofluid samples have we collected. And then we're really trying to expand that website to make it as useful for the community as possible. And I should acknowledge that we have people with lived experience who are advising us really throughout this. And David Schulman has been incredibly helpful as we think about how we approach this study, but there are also many others. We are developing a newsletter that we'll put out on the website and also through a mailing list. And then we also are using social media to keep people apprised of what's going on. We want that community feel to be a part of what we build through All ALS. And then accessibility. So when we started from the very beginning, we sort of recognized that what we're asking of people for an observational study is a lot. And there are many people who are willing to be a part of this. And we wanted to really do everything we could to make it possible for people to participate, whatever their experience is with the disease at this point. So we have 35 centers around the country, and there are ways for people to participate completely remotely. So if there's somebody in Alaska or in Hawaii where we don't unfortunately have centers, we can still enroll them in the study. They can give us information that can impact the way that we understand this disease and what we do to treat it in clinical trials in the future. Next slide. So this is sort of an overview of the timeline of this study. Now, remember, this is a nationwide consortium. So the study funding was awarded and work began in October 2023. In fact, the day that we learned of the award, we were at the NEALS annual meeting. The day after that, Bob Bowser and I actually presented to the meeting about our plans for this, and the two lead project managers for the project, Pravina Mohan and Courtney Inye were already meeting to talk about what our first meetings would look like and how to get started. So there was no time wasted. But what we were doing really from the very beginning was envisioning what this consortium would be, putting together, writing, refining 2 protocols, getting input from the community, from other advocacy and research organizations, convening with the CDC, getting input from people with lived experience, and then building the consortium, all of the contracting and the ethics board oversight that had to happen. And that happened remarkably quickly, so that the first site was activated and participant was enrolled by July 2024. And the consortium was really up and running at that point. Now, it takes some time to get all of the sites activated and enrolling. Our goal is to do that by March 2025. We're really well on our way, and in fact, ahead of where we thought we might be at this point, which is wonderful. Our first sort of patient enrollment goal is to have 1,200 participants enrolled in our 2 protocols by October 2025, and you'll see some of the numbers about the progress we're making, but it really is remarkable what we're beginning to accomplish together. And by May 2026, we'd like to have 2,000 participants enrolled. I want to frame this a little bit just to say nothing like this has been done in ALS. There are studies that have enrolled 1,000 participants. The data from those will actually be going into the knowledge portal, which is incredibly exciting. Things like Answer ALS and GTAC and Create. Those have been enrolled over many, many years. And this is something very different. The pace of this is very different. The scope of this is very different. And that's what it makes it so exciting to work on All ALS. Really, really a sort of a different way of thinking about what we can do. Next slide. So as I sort of started to say, the scale of this makes it different. We really want to enroll as many people with ALS as possible so that we have not just a small sampling, not just something statistical, but really a representation of who has ALS, what is their experience, what are the outcome measures that will capture the broad experience, what do subpopulations look like, how do we think about genetics, how do we apply genomic data to a very large group of participants. And none of that is possible with these small studies. So there's something new that's possible when we can do a big study like this. The other thing is collaboration. So we really are working with other advocacy organizations, community groups, and natural history studies. So if we think about the CDC National Registry, well, we're actually developing a plan for a way that we can share data back and forth between these 2 government-funded studies. There's the Natural History Consortium, which is active at a number of sites, and a number of those sites are actually participating in All ALS, not enrolling the same participants in the 2 studies, but actually enrolling new participants in All ALS to go alongside what they're doing in the natural history study. And then all of that data can be combined. Same thing with Target ALS. In fact, many of the sites, including MGH, are Target ALS sites for their natural history study, looking at CSF biomarkers. And that's happening alongside and in conjunction with All ALS, so that we're getting really a synergistic effect. And we also, ALS TDI has a study that bears a lot of resemblance to All ALS, and we have coordinated with them so that we have learnings from both of these studies and can sort of be aligned with them. That's really important for a study of this size. We've built in these remote options so that we can have a bigger enrollment in this study than ever before, but also geographically diverse population, a population of people who can't access sites or don't go to sites or are unable to get to sites with the frequency they would need to for this study. We have these fully remote options that are available for symptomatic patients, and then we have participants who are at risk for developing ALS, or maybe at risk for developing ALS is a better way to say that, who might carry a gene that could be causative of ALS. And may not have symptoms, and they are also participating. And that's actually in a sort of a remote in-person sort of hybrid fashion. So that's sort of innovative as well. And I think the data sharing is what brings all of this together. So we have questions at the outset about how our scales will perform, about what are meaningful changes on various of our scales. But what will happen when we share this data and when we share these biofluids, and we know this from other open source, open science sort of projects that we've done, what will happen when we share it is really where the magic happens. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about Target ALS and how we're aligning with Target ALS, and some of our centers that are participating in All ALS are also participating in Target ALS. Those are really closely aligned studies, and same with the Natural History Consortium. I talked about the CDC National ALS Registry and how we can share, or working on a plan to share data back and forth. And all FTD, you'll notice that the name is very similar. FTD stands for frontotemporal dementia. This is a disease that bears some genetic overlap with ALS, and there can be overlap syndromes of ALS and FTD, and some of the pathology, if we look at what's going on in neurons, what's going wrong there, can overlap between the two diseases. What doesn't overlap a lot is actually the symptomatology. So FTD is a type of dementia or cognitive change, whereas ALS is motor change. But we know that some people can have both of these kinds of symptoms. And so we're working very, very closely with our colleagues at All FTD, including by naming these in ways that show our collaboration, to really bring shared knowledge to the way that we're running the studies, but also to the way the data can be used down the line. Next slide. So when we set out to sort of do this study, we really knew that we were going to have to think large and inclusive, and we were going to have to make opportunities for people of all walks of life to be able to be a part of this, and people from all parts of the country and all stages of this disease. And so we really wanted to think inclusively, and that drove the way that we thought about these remote and hybrid options for the study. Reducing barriers to participation, learning from people living with ALS and people with lived experience, engaging study sites as we develop these protocols so that we knew what would work at the site. We can develop a beautiful study. If it can't be meted out at the site in a way that will be effective, then it won't be a successful study. So we really, really aimed to kind of reduce these barriers to participation. And out of that came things like the website with the patient interest form, so that people can reach out and tell us they'd like to be in a study, and we can find a spot for them to participate. Really is an exciting kind of part of this. Again, coordinating with other studies and then outreach activities and communication. And again, I'll just acknowledge David Schulman, who brings a whole different way of thinking about this than we in our sort of academic research minds bring to it. And that's been just an amazing early part of the collaboration. We really look forward to so much more that it'll bring. And also many other people with lived experience who are contributing to this study. Next slide. So we knew that we wanted to be innovative, and some of the things that we've done to try to give us new insights into the disease and insights into how to do studies in general are by creating a speech bank. So we're working with Linus Health, previously Oral Analytics, to bank and find a way to share recordings of speech so that we can use essentially AI to analyze motor speech for changes over time. We're working with FDA, who's very interested in how this could be an outcome measure in clinical trials. We've put in place a very sophisticated e-consent program. This allows us to remotely consent participants, record that consent, allows anybody who needs to see the consent down the line, check that the consent is valid, et cetera, at the site level, at the coordinating center level, and sort of keep those consents up to date. So this is, operationally and sort of behind the scenes, something that's very important, and we hope will actually translate into being used in clinical trials. And in fact, I was just having a conversation about how this could be incorporated into a new clinical trial just today. So that's really exciting. We hadn't worked with BioSend as the biorepository in the past. They've been really a joy to work with, really wonderful, sophisticated operation. And so that's really, I think, taken us to a new level as well. We have great kits. It makes this all very doable and keeps us organized on the back end. Our website with the embedded enrollment is, I think, more organized, more robust than we have done in studies before. And then home phlebotomy, this is something that we have done in a sporadic way with other studies, and in fact have learned from previous studies during the pandemic primarily that we could do this. We've never rolled it out at this scale before, and we're very excited to do that. We're also doing something called digital PROs. That stands for patient reported outcomes. And what this means is we have a platform that will email a link directly to a survey study, and those surveys are sent out once a month to participants. They can be done on a tablet, on a computer, on a phone. And those are asking participants to provide really important information about their function, their feeling, their quality of life, so that we can test those for their inclusion in future trials. They're also telling us about demographics and who's in the study and what subtypes of disease we're managing to enroll. And then I talked about the broad alignment with other studies. Next slide. So there are two studies that we're running. The first one is called ALL ALS Prevent, and that really focuses on understanding the earliest stages of the disease in people who are or may be at risk from a genetic perspective. And then the Assess ALL ALS study really collects important data on individuals who are living with ALS to track progression and identify new biomarkers of the disease. It also includes control participants so we can compare between people who do and do not have ALS. Next slide. So Prevent ALL ALS is people who are or may be genetically at risk. And the main objective is to characterize this asymptomatic ALS or FTD state by obtaining natural history data and performing longitudinal follow-up. And this is in people who have a family history of first-degree relatives who have ALS, or in some cases ALS or FTD in the family. That puts them at risk of carrying a gene mutation that could cause ALS. It does not mean that they necessarily have that gene mutation. And so that's why we have to be a little bit cautious about the wording of this. We're also sort of creating a cohort of people who may be genetically at risk of the disease. And I think there's power in that. And I think there are ideas that come from that and goals and also hopefully shared support. We also are offering ALS gene testing with appropriate pre- and post-test genetic counseling to those who participate in the study and would like to have that, but it certainly is not a requirement. All of this is done in a research setting. It's not included in a clinical chart unless the participant would like to put it in their clinical chart and they can get it to their care team or physicians if they'd like. And we really would like to facilitate rapid evaluation of the development of symptoms, what we call phenoconversion, so that anybody who's in the study and develops or thinks they may be developing symptoms can be evaluated very quickly. Next slide. So Assess ALL ALS is the second protocol. This is symptomatic participants and controls, people who don't have ALS. And the idea is to determine things like the minimally important difference in ALS-FRSR, speech, and other relevant outcome measures to assess the ALS-FRSR and how it correlates with survival and what we can learn about what are some key points in the disease that we need to intervene in various ways, and also who should be enrolling in clinical trials. Can we be more broad, for example, in our enrollment criteria? And then I think Ben Brooks asked the question about vital capacity, but also how people are using non-invasive ventilation. And we'll be capturing all of that data. Now, there's actually broad variation in things like when people begin using non-invasive ventilation or BiPAP during their clinical care. And since we're doing this study across the country and people can enroll remotely from anywhere across the country, we'll actually have information from different regions and different clinics and different people who've made different choices. And we will be able to correlate how people are doing from a respiratory point of view, what machines they're using, and how those are impacting what they're doing. And with the numbers that we plan to enroll and that we're hoping to get into the study, we will have those subgroups so that we can compare and come up with better best practices that will affect the field. And then we talked about capturing speech so that we can have features that may differentiate between ALS and controls that could help us diagnostically, but also reflect ALS progression or may predict loss of speech and be helpful in clinical care, but also in clinical trial settings. Next slide. So as we've sort of gone over, people who may be genetically at risk or may actually may or may not be genetically at risk. That is, you need not know that you have an ALS causative gene yourself, only that you have a family history. But if someone does know that they have an ALS causative gene and are asymptomatic, they could certainly enroll. Controls, these are people who do not have ALS or symptoms of ALS or a family history of ALS. Now, they might have another neurodegenerative disorder, and we've allowed for that because there can be a real benefit in comparing people who have one neurodegenerative disorder and another. And in fact, we're finding that there's more overlap between these diseases on a biomarker level than we might have thought originally. People who are symptomatic with ALS and are living with the disease can decide to participate on site, and this can be combined with a clinic visit, or they may participate completely remotely, including phlebotomy and all of the visits and the consent. Next slide. So I want to talk through a little bit about what actually happens in the study. So the first thing that happens in really any study is that people go through a consent form. So there'll be a time where one of the coordinators in the study would walk the participant through a consent form that talks about what will happen in the study, what blood is going to be drawn, will somebody want to participate and give spinal fluid, which is a possibility, will they be participating remotely or in person. Now, this can happen either in person or it can happen over a video televisit, and then if that's the case, the signature would be sort of an electronic signature in our e-consent form. There will be questionnaires that will be a part of the kind of first visit, things like the ALS Functional Rating Scale. But there will also be questionnaires that are emailed out through our secure electronic PRO system called NeuroPro. And those will come at a cadence of about once per month, a little bit less frequently for people who are participating in the PREVENT study. And we are, again, really trying to develop outcome measures that can change the way we do clinical trials. People who are participating will be asked to provide blood samples about once every 3 months, either in PREVENT or in ASSESS. And then people can elect to provide CSF. This is a really important part of what we're doing because many biomarkers we think, and we have experience to tell us, are much more sensitive in the spinal fluid. And that's a part of an annual visit for the PREVENT study, or more frequently for the ASSESS study for those who opt into that. And then study visits, again, will be done either in clinic or remotely at either 3 to 4 month intervals for ASSESS or 1 year intervals with some virtual visits in between for the PREVENT study. Next slide. So as we've said, biofluids are stored in the central biorepository. They're shared with researchers upon request. Importantly, they don't contain identifying information. So it's not your name that's on them. It's not even a study number that can be traced back to any given person, but they're shared in a de-identified way. And they will be shared with clinical data that is de-identified as well when requested. Clinical data is going to be stored in the electronic data capture system called Neurobank, and then transferred over to the AMP-ALS portal called the Knowledge Portal, and that'll be shared with requesting researchers, either with biofluids or, in many cases, researchers can make use of the data without biofluids as well. Next slide. So there are 35 clinical sites as a part of this. They're broadly broken up into East and West. If you look at this from a directionality perspective, you can see that East and West is more a state of mind. It's actually really named after the clinical coordinating centers. So the West centers are the ones that report to the West Clinical Coordinating Center in Arizona, and the East are the ones that report to the East Clinical Coordinating Center in Massachusetts. This is really, the group of investigators, the group of site staff that are working on this study are really working hard to make this happen, and we're incredibly excited to be working with these sites. Next slide. So this is sort of where we are now. We're looking, if you look at the number of sites activated, orange is kind of what we expect for that time point, and blue is where we are. So we're really right on track for sort of where we want to be. You'll notice we're a little bit behind what we would expect for March, but not much. So we're almost meeting our March goals, and it's early February. So that's really exciting. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the projected enrollment in orange, and you can see our actual enrollment in blue. So we're just a smidge behind where we expected to be, but you also see how quickly we need to sort of pick up the pace of enrollment in order to meet our enrollment goals. And I think, that's what's really exciting about this. And we're constantly talking to the sites. People are finding us through our website. We were just looking today at a number of people who have filled out the PIF and are waiting to be contacted by sites. So really exciting to make those connections. Next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Berry.
Perfect.
And I share your excitement. I'm very proud and happy to be part of the ALL ALS steering committee and really excited to see how well organized and how quickly this program has taken off. So I want to introduce you now to several people with lived experience of ALS who are truly remarkable in this space. A couple of them have already enrolled in the ALL ALS study. They're going to talk to you about their experiences. But I'd like to start first with Dave Schulman, who you've heard his name mentioned by Dr. Berry several times. When I think of Dave Schulman, I use the initials GSD. He's a guy who gets stuff done. I'm going to keep it clean for the kids, but he gets stuff done. Dave, since being diagnosed with ALS in May of 23, has really just dived right in to the ALS community. He brings amazing expertise with strategic commercial marketing expertise. He still is working full time and finds the time to add his talents to so many areas in the ALS space, including ALL ALS. He's been a patient fellow at the International Symposium. He has, in fact, I met him at the NEALS meeting, I remember about a year and a half ago. He co-chairs the AMP ALS Natural History Study Working Group. He's involved in the Healy ALS Platform Trial, Patient Advisory Committee. And I'm so pleased that he's involved with this study as well. He's brought so much energy and expertise. So Dave, I want to open it up before we move to Gwen and Debbie's story. Share some of your excitement with us, would you?
Absolutely. That is way too kind. What I would say, from my perspective, what drew me into this is, as a pal like you, I'm still like lost on why we're, more than a century into knowing about this disease, and there's still very little we can do about it. And the underlying reason is we still don't know enough. And a natural history study of this magnitude is our chance to go out and get that information. And what I would add to that is we pushed for this in the Act for ALS. We wanted federal dollars for research. And this is what we're getting. So we better enroll and help it be successful, because this is for us. And the other thing I would say too is that, in any other natural history study, you don't have a ALS patient around the table helping to drive stuff forward. And I've been very blessed that, I show up and I feel like I have a real seat at the table, which underscores why I think this is all of us. This is our study. And I couldn't be more excited about it. And I couldn't be more happy to give my time and expertise to helping it be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And I need to give credit where credit is due. Dave is the one who came up with the title for tonight's presentation. So thank you, Dave, for adding some pizzazz to this as well. We're now going to hear from two women who have already enrolled in the ALL ALS study. And I want to give you a little bit about their background. Gwen Peterson, who many of you in the community may know, unfortunately cannot be with us tonight, but it's for a very good reason. Gwen is accepting an award from Team Gleason tonight for her work with her ALS story, which is one of the many groups that she's involved in. She also is a NEALS Research Ambassador and a mentor. She's a patient advisor to various pharma companies and truly a delightful person to deal with. So you're going to hear from her shortly when she's given us a video to share her experience with the enrollment so far of ALL ALS. Debbie Lauer is also joining us tonight. She's joining us live. Debbie comes from a C9 family. She has lost many members, unfortunately, of her family to this disease. And she's really taken that experience and, to her credit, has gotten herself tremendously involved for many years with a variety of ALS groups across the spectrum. She has been active for well over 15 years in the ALS space, and she's a tremendous advocate. So she's also going to speak about her experience. Can we, Christian, at this point, can we share Gwen's video?
Here we go. Oh.
And survey assessments, people living with Gwen.
I'm going to start it over.
Hi, I'm Gwen Peterson. I'm living with ALS, and I'm happy to give you some scoop on the Assess All ALS study. So really high level, what it is a series of blood draws and survey assessments people living with ALS can do right from the comfort of your own home. So I am enrolled in the remote arm of the study, which means I don't need to leave my house. A mobile phlebotomist will come to me, and I can complete these surveys via an app on my phone. So why is this study important to me? What does it all mean? This one aims to get to the root of why people get ALS. So today, there's little we know about the natural history of this disease. And so wouldn't it be amazing if we could tell future patients, one, why they got ALS, and two, hand them a targeted treatment plan? Well, there's not going to be any targeted treatments until we figure out what the targets are. So this study aims to answer some, if not all of that. So thanks so much for listening. I urge you to participate. I am an open book. Please feel free to contact me directly, and thank you.
Thanks, Christian. I'm so happy Gwen was able to share her experience with all of us. I think that it makes a big difference to hear from somebody who's actually gone through the process. I'd like to turn it over now to Debbie Lauer. Debbie, would you like to tell us about your experience enrolling, a little bit about your background enrolling as a control?
Absolutely. And thank you all for having me join you this evening. As Andrea spoke, I am a member of a C9 family. I was caregiver to my mom when she got bulbar onset ALS when she was 62. So in her generation, we lost 5 to ALS, FTD, or both. And in my generation, I've lost 2 cousins, and we currently have 2 family members that are living with it. So I've been an advocate for nearly 18 years. You know, I've been a NEALS Research Ambassador for the last few years because I'm very passionate about research. I know that's what's going to help my family. We have more than 100 living descendants from my grandparents. I've met incredible people living with ALS over these last 18 years, and I know it's going to help every other person who may be diagnosed in the future. So in terms of genetic ALS, this study is vitally important to researchers. that people like myself and my family get involved. How else are they going to find the biomarkers that we need them to find that are going to help us figure out why the disease starts when it does, why it progresses the way it does, and what kind of treatments can be put together to help us all out. My hope is, the results of these two studies, and as Dr. Berry said, maybe a third, can help us move closer to biomarkers versus things like the ALS FRSR. So when I heard about these studies at an ALS walk in October, I knew right away I wanted to get involved, and I shared the news with my family. So far, two of them are participating in the PREVENT study with their goal of participating through the whole thing and finding out if they are genetic carriers themselves. And I'm in the ASSESS study. I'm in the ASSESS study. So because I'm in that one, I'm in the control group. I found out back in, 2017, that I did not have the mutation. I can share with you the sign-up process was very easy. The research coordinator, Ohio State, she did a great job of talking us through the consent form in person. I did complete the first visit back in December, a whole lot of information gathering about family medical history, my medical history, that sort of thing. I completed the cognitive tests, which frankly were a little bit unnerving, having not gone through that before, but we managed to have a couple laughs along the way. They did the blood draws, like Dr. Berry said, and then, of course, the lumbar puncture process. So since then, I've completed both the January and February at-home tasks through the app and the online portion. Very easy, didn't take a long time. So in short, I just want to say I'm very grateful for this opportunity for my family and for others to help researchers get us more answers. So I hope all of you who are listening today will go to that website, hit the participate button and sign up. And I hope you all share with other people that you know about what you've learned tonight. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Debbie. Really appreciate it. Kristen, can we go to the next slide? Okay, well, we've heard from Gwen and we've heard from Debbie, and they'll stay on, Debbie will stay on the call if there are questions with respect to her experience as well. Can we go to the next slide? So let's talk about how you can get involved in ALL ALS and what this looks like, and we'll walk you through the process. We've certainly talked about how to join the study. There's a participant interest form on the website, and there'll be a QR code in a moment that you can take a look at. And we'll share some more information on the next couple of slides in terms of how you can connect with a participating site. You can volunteer. You can reach out to one of the coordinating centers if you want to serve on a committee, you want to be part of this study in another way, and we'll have that information also on the last slide here that we'll show. You can share information about this study on social media. The only way a study of this magnitude is going to be successful is by broad participation across the entire community. And I want to say it's not just the usual suspects, right? It's not just those individuals living with ALS who are very active in the community. Of course, we want their participation, but we also want participation of people who haven't had that opportunity. And we need to find other ways to reach them. So social media is one way to do that. And talk about this. We're all involved in various groups, whether these are Facebook groups, these are friends, these are people we know from meetings. Talk about this study. Again, the way we're going to move the needle forward is by getting broad participation. Next slide, please. So here's the website. And you know what? The actual URL is not up, but it is on a later slide. If you want to copy it down in case you don't want to pick up the QR code, it is all-als.org. And the website, which came on about 6 weeks ago now, is going to track the study progress, as Dr. Berry discussed. It'll give you an opportunity to find an ALS site, whether that's a site you will attend in person or participate remotely. And it'll give you the patient interest form, participant interest form, so that you can fill out that information and have a member of the team contact you. Next slide, please. Here you go. So this is what the participant interest form looks like. I believe that either Courtney or Pravina or both of them, I think, have put the link to this in the chat as well. It's pretty simple. You can see there are 9 lines to fill out, and somebody on the study team will get back to you. Next slide, please. So here's how to connect. There's a QR code if it's easier for you to connect to the website that way. You can also find out more information about either the Assess ALS or the Prevent ALS arms of this study through clinicaltrials.gov, and those numbers are here. You can also go to the NEALS Trial Finder, which is always a useful tool, and that information is here as well. And again, and I want to reiterate this because this study team, as I have found working with them as we prepared for this webinar, is incredibly responsive. And you can email them directly at info@all-als.org. Next slide. So thank you. Again, this study belongs to the ALS community. Please get involved. Please ask questions. Please let your friends know we're all in this together and we need to revolutionize ALS. Thanks. We will, at this point, I want to thank really Everything ALS, who's been tremendously helpful with giving us this forum. I want to thank all of the presenters. I especially want to thank Dave Schulman and Debbie Lauer and Gwen Peterson and all of those who've helped inform this study and have enrolled so far and will enroll in the future to move it forward. So we'll go ahead and move to questions. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's time for the community to step into the spotlight as a group. So the floor is everybody's to ask questions. There were questions that were being asked in the chat. They got some answers along the way. I'm not sure everybody can see the chat. So please, if you're not able to see the chat and the responses, raise your hand. In the meantime, I'm going to jump to the end for if there are any other additional questions, or the floor is yours. You can unmute and you can ask your own questions. I did see some questions about access and some other areas of participation, but here's one right away. If you participate in this study, are you able to participate in drug studies as well?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. This is something we talked about a lot, and in fact, we'll be capturing what other studies or trials people are participating in to sort of help try to bridge gaps or knit together data down the line that as possible to try to, again, ALS is not, it's an uncommon disease, and the more we can create big data sets for uncommon diseases like ALS, the more we can really unleash these powerful new tools of AI, and that will be transformative. And so we're really trying to pull out all the stops to create these, these big data resources. We also want to make sure that nobody has to choose between being in an observational study, which is incredibly important for the field, we hope can bring a sense of community, and being in a treatment trial, which is, brings a different kind of hope, but is also so important.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to an earlier one, just for some potential additional explanation or clarification. Thank you, Pravina. You did offer an initial answer, which is, will symptomatic patients be offered genetic counseling and testing in Assess All ALS? You may have genetic carriers among your symptomatic patients. Pravina's original answer was that it's not provided as part of Assess protocol, but we do collect this information as part of medical history. Is there anything else you want to expound upon as far as, when you collect it as part of medical history and what can be done from there?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and really comes down to a sort of a matter of resources and how we had to design these trials. We don't have a provision for genetic counseling and genetic testing with return of results as a part of Assess. We did talk at length about that, both with people with lived experience and with our investigators and across the sites as well. ALS genetic testing is really should be offered really as standard of care in clinics at this point. And hopefully with genetic counseling along with that, if it's requested. I will also say that most ALS physicians, because we're talking about this so frequently, can at least manage the kind of typical pre-testing counseling. Now, there may be situations where people have a more complex history or there's a more complex reason they want the testing, and certainly then genetic counselors, can get involved right up front. Sometimes we end up with in clinic, we end up with complicated variants of uncertain significance, and that can really take, either a geneticist or genetic counselor input as well. Because that is so much a standard of care, we didn't include that in the Assess All ALS protocol. After great discussion, we would have loved to do that. It gets expensive. That is not really, there are many more complexities about doing that for people who are asymptomatic and may carry a gene that is causative of it, or a gene mutation that is causative of ALS. There may be reasons people want to keep that out of their clinical chart. There may be reasons that they want to be thoughtful about whether they receive those results but would like to contribute. The implications are different and a little bit more complex, and so that's why we embedded it into the Prevent All ALS protocol.
I was going to also add a little bit more about, there's a question about whether people with HSP can enroll. So you provided an initial answer that they can enroll as control participants. I want to get a little bit more into that because there's also communities like VCP and others. Are they communities you're engaging for potential recruitment for control, or for even just to help? And is there a benefit also from kind of just understanding for the purposes of improving the diagnostic odyssey people go through?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and we had a kind of a robust debate as well in the beginning about whether we should enroll controls with no neurologic disorders or people just with neurologic disorders, or leave it open. What we did was really leave it more open, because both of those categories of kind of comparators can be really important when we're trying to understand the pathology of ALS. That is, what's going wrong, what might be a biomarker, what are the differences in demographics, are there differences in medical history or medications, and all of those questions. So sometimes the first step that we need to take is to say, can we use this biomarker to tell a healthy population from one that is living with ALS? Other times we say, look, okay, we've got that, we can tell that, but can we tell the difference between somebody with ALS and somebody who has another neurodegenerative disorder, or even a different motor neuron disorder like SMA, HSP? So what we decided is we would allow sort of broad enrollment. The other thing that does is opens the door for us to potentially use this as a resource to understand those other diseases at the same time. So that's sort of how that works. We would take a deep medical history and then be very clear about how those different categories of control, biofluids, and clinical information could be used.
Thank you. There was a question that I think is more exemplary of just having to think through how one chooses different studies, non-interventional studies to be a part of. And the question was specifically, what differentiates this from the ALS TDI ARC program, and why would I choose one over the other? I think broadly, there are a lot of natural history studies and different types of studies, but we can start with ALS TDI ARC if that helps.
Yeah. So first of all, Fernando Vieira and others at ALS TDI they're part of AMP ALS. They've contributed to All ALS. They've been a huge help, and they have a wonderful study. The ARC study is wonderful. So the ARC study has leaned a little bit more into digital endpoints, and until recently actually was collecting probably fewer biofluids, but they are collecting biofluids. There are many similarities, and the hope is that this data will rest alongside each other. One of the things about this data is it's going directly into the ALS Knowledge portal. It will sit alongside all of those other studies and be harmonized right from the start. And so we hope that, and there's no embargo, there's no sort of, first use for this, and then it'll be shared down the line. It's going sort of as soon as that data is cleaned. In fact, we had a conversation today about how do we flag data that might be available for sharing, but we haven't been able to monitor all the data points. We really are going to be that quick about sharing. So, I think some of it is about what resonates and where do you find community, and I think there is enough to do in this disease that we would love it for people to participate in all ALS. If that doesn't feel like the right option, ALS TDI has a wonderful study in ALS ARC. And so, that's, we are collecting spinal fluid from people who are participating in person and would like to give spinal fluid. It's optional; they don't have to. And I think we have the PREVENT study is set up a little bit differently than ALS TDI as well, a little bit more robust genetic counseling and so forth.
One thing I would add from a patient perspective is each of the websites describes exactly what's entailed. So if you go to the ARC site, you'll see they track movement and some other metrics that aren't tracked in all ALS. And I think it all boils down to, everyone with ALS has their struggles. What are you willing to give? If you want to show up at the site and give CSF and do movement tracking, God bless you. There's a study for you. If you want to do something at home with occasional blood collection, periodic voice tracking, there's something for you too. So do a little bit of upfront research and figure out what works best. There's no wrong answer. Just pick one.
Yeah, that's right. And you deserve to be excited about what you're contributing to. It's it is asking something of you. So I love your answer, David, and that's exactly what I would say. Get excited and get involved. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks to David. Thanks for chiming in as well, and really putting it bluntly for everybody of how important it is. So, if there are any other questions, by all means. I think Sean, you had a kind of clarifying question for James as well, which is the inverse of observational trial. It doesn't disqualify you, but will being in a drug trial disqualify you from all ALS?
No.
Okay. Great. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, everybody, tonight. I know it's we're an hour and 20 minutes into it, and honestly, you held everybody's attention all the way through with all of the great details you provided, all of the really great history that you've shared of how much time you've spent debating the things that really matter and designing a study also that really can be responsive to the needs of people across the country. We certainly are going to continue to work with you. So Everything ALS, we've been really supportive of this program. We've worked extensively with David and the committees to make sure that what we've learned along the way is shared with them as well when it comes to remote engagement, to the sensors, and we know how important it is for this to move at speed. So enrollment is the big driver now. The faster there's enrollment, the faster we learn together. So that's also an important component. Thank you. Is there anything else, Andrea or the team that wanted to share?
There's just one more question in the chat box. I don't think we answered. There was a question from Terry Walsh: diagnosis of PLS eligible for the study?
Take it away,
Uh, Yeah, so for the access protocol, unfortunately, the control, we have the exclusion criteria of PLS. So I don't think, yeah.
Yeah, this is one that we may, this is still a hot topic of
Yeah.
discussion about how we handle PLS. Now,
Yeah.
it also turns out that PLS in many cases actually fits a definition for ALS. So I think this is it's complicated, but the way the L-Escorial criteria are laid out, many times PLS will actually fit a definition for ALS. So this is worth having a discussion. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us, fill out a patient interest form, and we can see if you could be involved. The reality is that much of the time the answer is yes.
Actually, you know what? While we're still going, I did see that question from Bob Molinari after the fact that, and James, that you replied. Maybe you can expound a little bit more on where we're going with that question, which is that some types of simple engagement with neurodegenerative diseases can create improvements. Do we account for those in these assessments?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hope I interpreted this right, but it actually comes back a little bit to what Ben Brooks's question was early on about, are we capturing the impact of non-invasive ventilation or BiPAP machines? But there are lots of things that people do use, for various interventions that are fairly simple that may improve how they're doing or change their ALSFRS-R score. So we're trying to keep track of those interventions. We call them key events. And we hopefully with this many participants will finally be able to look back and see what the impact of some of these interventions is. Can't promise. Some of this is pretty complex, but we're trying to capture some of that data.
Thank you again to James and Andrea and Shubhangi and all of our guests also who spoke on the study, David and the rest of the crew. It's a big crew tonight, but we hope we covered all angles. And if there are any other questions about the study, I believe there's one more. Will you expect spinal fluid taken at Mayo Clinic from my ALS diagnosis? If there's any submission of or transmission of spinal fluid data that could be provided, please by all means.
Yeah, so that's a little more complicated, but we are actively working on ways to link biorepositories. So there's Target ALS, the Niels biorepository, the biorepository from CDC, the biorepository that's being created at BioSend. All of those sound like very disparate things, but the reality is there's a small group of people that are working on these. We do have ways of of working across those biorepositories. To try to fill requests from scientists who need access to biofluids, and certainly the Mayo Clinic has a wonderful one and is incorporated as well. So it may be that we don't actually move the biofluid around, but rather kind of think about how do we reach into various biorepositories to fill the requests that the scientists are sending in.
Thank you. All right. I think I got the last one there. So again, thanks everybody for joining tonight, for staying with us, and for asking your questions as well. We really appreciate all the efforts of everybody involved.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.